This happened in New England around 1993, yet I still remember it like it happened yesterday. We had just moved out of our home and into an apartment building owned by my father and uncle. The home was a two-family home, but it had been previously a part of the Veterans Hospital that was next door to the right of the house. There was a larger apartment building to the left, but its front door was on the side street. Across was a large building and parking lot that took up the whole block. I believe at the time it was being used as a child psychiatric center, but don't quote me on that. 12-year-old me decided to go out for a bike ride on this day. I rode a block over to the park first. The park was 1 block wide and 2 blocks long. I rode on the path that would be the perimeter of it. On my way back around again, I saw what 12-year-old me thought was a drug deal. Older me knows it definitely was. Instead of staying at the park, I thought, let me get out of here. I rode back towards my house then. Just before I got to my house, I noticed my mother was outside trimming the front hedges. Probably paranoid that someone could hide in them and attempt to break in the first floor. There had been a renter there when my dad lived in the home, but his lease had expired and was not renewed. I drive by my mom, say hey, and head over to the parking lot that was diagonal from our house. I can see her, and she can see me, though I'm technically on the block. I'm riding around and around when I noticed a man driving slowly. He was in a gray car. Okay, maybe he's looking for a certain place. 5 minutes later, he creeps by again, only slower. I see you, buddy. After the 4th time he passed, I was like, yeah, this guy's up to something. So I memorized his license plate, waited for him to finish his slow roll by me, and then biked over to my mom. I quickly filled her in on what was happening. She tells me to go back to the parking lot and runs in to grab the cordless phone. I do as I was told. Sure enough, he comes creeping back by again. Only this time, my mom is watching the whole thing play out, as she is on the phone with the cops. They get there fairly quickly. The officer shows up, just so happens to be an officer that my mother knew. She had previously been our city's mayor's administrator's director, and when he lost his 3rd re-election run, she went back into social work as a supervisor for, at the time, DDS now, DCF. She also planned a couple festivals in the city, couple of times a year, so she knew quite a bit of cops and whatnot. I see her talking to him, and after a few moments they wave me over. I tell him everything that happened. While I'm telling him, I look up, can see this guy slowly coming down the street again. When he got to the stop, he must have seen me talking to the officer, because instead of taking a right like he had every other time, he hit the gas and went straight. I say that's him, and off he goes after him saying, I'll be right back. 20-30 minutes later, he comes back. He says to me, you're very smart and did the right thing. He then pulls my mom aside to have a chat with her. Turns out the man was a registered sex offender in the next town over. He was out on the prowl and thought he was better off in the big city. Unfortunately for him, he came across me, a young girl that was raised with a paranoid mother that drilled into my head from the moment I was born to be aware of my surroundings at all times. Okay, so this happened a few months back when I was 20 and still living in Denver. It was about 8:45 at night on a weekday, and I was walking back to my house from the bus stop, which was only about a 5 to 10 minute walk, depending on my pace. I had my headphones on because I hadn't removed them when I got off the bus. The street was completely empty and quiet, so I'm being mindful to check my surroundings, turning the volume down on my headphones, and trying to walk as quietly as possible to hear if anyone comes up behind me. The walk is pretty uneventful, that is, until I glance behind me. For about the 20th time since I started walking, and notice a car slowly turning onto the street I'm on. At first, I'm not really put off by it, since I know that one of my neighbors that lives further down the block usually gets home right around the same time that I'm coming up on her house. So I keep walking, but I turn my headphones off and tug them down around my neck before pulling my phone out, in case I need to make an emergency call. I'm walking for another 30 seconds when I realize that the car still hasn't passed me. So of course I glance behind me again to see where it's gone. Find that it's pulled up to the curb a little way behind me, just idling. At this point, I'm a little nervous, so I quicken my pace, and since now I'm only a block away from my house, I keep glancing behind me, taking note that I haven't heard any car doors close, which means no one has gotten out of the car. I try to tell myself that nothing is wrong, and that the person is probably just taking a phone call or looking for directions. About another minute passes, and then I hear the car coming up behind me. It's driving slowly, way slower than the speed limit, and rumbles past me at the same pace. I glance over as it does, and see that there's 3 men inside, and all three of them are looking right at me. Immediately, warning bells start going off, and I unlock my phone, pulling up my mom's contact so I can call her right away if needed. At this point, I'm literally 4 houses down from my own, and I think I'm in the clear when it looks like the car is going to continue on its way. Down the rest of the street, except it doesn't. Pulls up to the curb, about 20 feet away from where I am. Normally, this wouldn't be a problem, but they've pulled the car so close to the curb that the front and back tires on the right side are basically up on the sidewalk, which means I'd have to walk onto the grass or brush against the car as I pass. Immediately, I am like, nope, and I abruptly cross the street before calling my mom. Even though I'm literally only 2 houses away from my own, I'm watching the car as the phone rings, and I notice that the guys are looking at the sidewalk where I was, just moments before, like they're waiting for me to pass. I can see the guy in the back seat, craning his neck to look out the back window. It takes a second, but they realize that I'm no longer there and start to frantically look around for me. The driver spots me across the street, and I make a point to show him that I'm on the phone. He says something to his mates before abruptly spinning the car around and taking off down the street. I hang up the phone and cross the street to my house in a hurry. I tell my mom what happened when I get inside, but she scoffs and says that they probably just wanted to ask for directions. Well, whatever their intentions were, I'm just glad that I made it home safely. I was visiting my partner, we'll call him Leo here, at his home in a rural part of my state, about a 45-minute drive away from the college town I'd lived in at the time. There were snow/ice advisories in place for early the next morning, and I figured I should head back before those conditions hit. It was probably 10ish p.m., really dark out, and I started on my way back home. The roads seem a little icy, but nothing my little 2-wheel drive couldn't handle. About 5 minutes out from Leo's house, I was on a very quiet 2-lane, 2-way, hilly road with scarce lighting. Nothing inherently creepy about that, as I'd been up and down it countless times before. Well, I happened to be on the phone with Leo when I stumbled across a completely flipped car in the other lane, partially blocking my path. I was in shock and couldn't properly communicate this discovery to Leo, who was probably growing confused and concerned. Trying to be a good Samaritan, I almost immediately leaped out of my car, telling Leo hurriedly that I needed to investigate. Stayed on the phone, or so I thought. He could actually no longer hear me, and vice versa, as the call was connected to my car's Bluetooth pairing system. As I approached the flipped car, scanning the scene for any crash victims, a man, old white guy, ragged appearance, around age 60, stumbled out from behind the vehicle. I rushed over, asked him, "Are you okay?" and began insisting on calling an ambulance, police/anyone who could help the situation. I was a couple feet away from him and kept an eye on the car, half expecting to glean any details of the incident or spot other potential wounded passengers, but I couldn't make anything out in the dark, and the window tints didn't help. The man became panicked and told me repeatedly and frantically, "Please do not call 911. Don't do it. It's under control," and added feebly that a friend of his would be there soon to help. My spidey senses started to kick in at this point. He appeared completely unscathed while the car was certainly totaled and flipped upside down, and he seemed unusually composed too, right up until I mentioned calling for help. At this point, I imagine Leo is frantic on the phone, and I now realize the call is connected to my car speakers. I begin to back away from the old dude, still totally shaken by what I'm seeing, and toward my parked car, still running. I'm probably 20 feet away from it now. As I'm backing out, a guy starts walking toward me and saying stuff that I can't recall now. I must have blocked it out. Finally, I decided to just wish him luck and picked up my pace, not turning back on him, till I got to my car and was able to drive off. I mean, I had no way of defending myself, and the situation turned very sketchy very quickly. As I drove past, I noticed another parked car, a few lengths behind the wrecked one. To this day, I have regrets about the whole thing. I definitely should have called 911. There was no legitimate reason not to. Who was this guy? Was he just in shock? Maybe even in the crash? Was it even his car? Or was he the owner of the other nearby one? Why did he insist on not receiving help from emergency services?